Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Life Camp Peace Building panel. We are so grateful for your presence joining us today as we talk about how we build peace. And before we begin, over the past couple of weeks and months, we've unfortunately had to give lots of moments of silence to families and loved ones who have been impacted by gun violence. And so before we begin, we invite you to give a moment of stillness to yourself. And so we're just going to take the time to breathe together, to get on one mind and one accord, so we can open up the space to give and receive during this panel. So I invite you to sit comfortably in your chair, allow the weight of the chair to just support you, and take a moment to just be mindful of breathing in through the nose with your mouth closed. Just take a deep breath in. And I want you to notice that the air is cool when it comes in through the nose. Have you ever noticed that? And when you exhale, I want you to slightly part your lips as if you were blowing out of a straw and exhale slowly. And so we're going to do that together 4 times before we begin the session. And I just wanted to add this before we begin to connect with our breath. As we're all in different places physically, we all come from different walks of life. We're all different genders, different races, different preferences. The one thing that connects all of us is the breath. The breath is everywhere at the same time, allowing all of us to breathe. The breath is the one source of all life, and none of us know when the breath will leave. And the breath is the one thing we connect to when we need to relieve stress or anxiety. And so, because the breath is ever present, ever powerful, and allows us to tap into the all knowing, I invite you all to connect with the one source of all life that makes us one. So, let us join together now. And as we breathe in, we're going to breathe in for a count of 4. We'll hold our breath for just a moment and we'll breathe out slowly for a count of 6. And again, we're just going to do this 4 times for all the 4 directions of the earth. And the last thing I'll instruct you to do or invite you to do is every time you exhale, allow your body to relax and allow yourself to release. Okay? So let's begin. Sit comfortably in your chair. If you want to lean back, that's fine. And allow yourself to close your eyes or let your eyelids be heavy and just focus on nothing. Really give yourself this moment of stillness. And let's begin. Breathe in through the nose for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it just for a moment, and then through the mouth, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take another deep breath in, deeply through the nose. Notice the cool air. Hold it for a moment and breathe out slowly, slowly through the mouth, allowing your body to relax with each exhale. Again, breathing in through the nose. Breathe in the cool air and breathe in gratitude and peace. Hold it just for a moment and let go slowly of anything that does not serve you in this moment, allowing yourself to release all stress, release all questions, release all worry and doubt. And last time together, let's take a deep breath in, breathing in gratitude, grace, peace, and joy. And hold it for just a moment and allow ourselves to release again, blowing out slowly, allowing the body to relax, allowing yourself to be present to this gift of life. And whenever you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes or come into focus. The one thing I invite us to do today is to be present. Your presence is truly a gift. It is the greatest gift that we can give to one another. And so, again, we are so grateful for your presence at this time. And without further ado, I invite you to join us as we welcome Crystal McCrary McGuire, longtime friend, advocate, and supporter of Life Camp. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kebra. I appreciate you centering us and getting us in a place this morning where we can be of one mind, focused on healing, focused on our communities, and focused on the work, the critical, essential work of Life Camp, of our dear sister, our queen, Erica Ford. Thank you. Erica and Kepra and I actually met, it's been over a decade now. I actually don't remember how many years, but we came together in purpose around Life Camp. A mutual friend of ours, Ellen Lowy, I believe, introduced us, and she said, Crystal, you must know about the work of Life Camp. And so a decade plus, it's probably like 15 years, but decade plus long friendship, allyship was formed. And I have to say, my family and I have been involved in a wide range of New York City philanthropic work in every sector. But there was something so necessary and so on the ground, truly making a difference in our communities, of the work that Erica Ford was doing, that was seared into my spirit. And that was the beginning of my, I became a disciple, I suppose. I don't know how else I can put it, but I became a disciple of the work that Life Camp is doing, and they are doing the work. They have, I think of one of the things that Brian Stevenson says from EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative. He says, it's critical in doing the work for our communities, you must have proximity. And Life Camp and Erica Ford and her team that she has assembled, they are their community. Their community is them. It is proximity on the ground, actually front lines, putting in the work, ensuring that our communities have resources and love and support in stopping, preventing violence, in helping deal with the trauma that far, far too many of our families are experiencing and continue to experience. So I just wanted to give that as a brief introduction to my relationship with Life Camp. And I just want to ask you, Erica, to start off, if you could just tell us here about your history and your journey of what you were seeing in your community to start Life Camp.
Greetings. Thank you all. Thank you for coming out today and participating in this important conversation. In the 80s and the 90s, as some of you may have heard before, a lot of my friends died from gun violence. And we did a campaign. We put their faces on a picture and we put them on t-shirts and we put them on posters as a way to symbolize what we're losing in that crack epidemic in the 80s and the 90s. And from that campaign, I saw their children's face and I saw the void of life in their body, the absence of hope in their body. And from that, I started to try to give them the tools that they needed to break the cycle of violence. And in doing that, went through a lot of different organizations, a lot of different names, but worked together with the people around me to build a system that we can transfer the epidemic of violence, the disease of violence, the the historical trauma that these children have faced from the death and loss of their parents and the constant gun violence in their community. And from doing that, we presented the model, the concept, the idea of the VIP system to the then mayor, Bloomberg, and it was adopted. And I'm fast forwarding a lot, but the concept and the idea of the crust of our work was adopted by the mayor's office under the title of the New York City Crisis Management System. And it started as 5 sites with $5 million and is now grown across the city to 36 sites and around $43 million. But what we took there never was really able to be conceptualized, because most of the people writing the scopes of services and writing the blueprint, or the orange print as we would like to have it, of what we took there, they didn't know what they didn't know. They could never conceptualize what it is I was bringing to them, what it is that we were telling them, what it is that we needed to really transform from the pain of violence, from the trauma of violence. And also on top of that, at that point in time in my life, I was, as Deepak called me, the angry peacemaker. And so even my ability to transfer the information was from a desire of fear. And what I mean by that was that I wanted it now. I wanted you to understand what I was saying. I wanted you to see, but not even realizing you could never see what I could see. You could never feel the pain in the absence of these children. And so I say all of that to say is that we built a system that works. And as we sit here now in the rise of gun violence, we also sit in the rise of our success. In our target area, last year when violence was high, we had no shootings on those major holidays. We had no increase in the numbers in which you see around the city. Memorial weekend that just passed, we had no shootings, right? We went up to 562 days with absolutely no shootings in our target area. We went up to 4 years with absolutely nobody being killed in our target area. Prior to us starting the work in this area, there was 17 people shot a year and 4 people killed. And I say all of that to say is that the pain of losing our friends stimulated a response that did break a cycle of violence, that did help these children transfer their pain and their trauma. But we have to expand our work.
Thank you, Erica. Can I just ask you to elaborate on something really quickly for me? What is it specifically about your program and your methods that have been so effective? I mean, to have that period, that 562 days of peace, essentially, what was it that was actually happening with your team on the ground that was making that difference?
So as you talked about in the beginning, that those closest to the problem are the solution to the problem. And so the credible messengers that we hire, the formerly incarcerated men and women that we hire, who once walked up and down these streets and created the high-risk individuals, know where to go, know who to talk to, know the language to speak to these young men and women who are the highest risk of shooting somebody or being shot, to stop them in their tracks. And last year there was a triple homicide, and we were at the funeral for one of the young men. And I said to my staff, go talk to that guy right now. And he went over to the young man and he started to cry, because he said to the young man, he said, I see in your eyes what was in my eyes 30 years ago before I went to jail. Don't do it. Don't do it. And he talked him off that ledge of revenge, of retaliation. No one else could do that. He stopped because he respected that individual, because he knows the journey in which that individual traveled. And so you have real people doing real work, and meeting it where it's at, and just like we have credible messengers, we have credible clinicians that go in our Peace Mobile, go into the communities, go into the prisons, and help transform the pain that a lot of our families and our young people are feeling, and give them a sense of purpose, give them the ability to heal and realize that there is hope on the other side of that trauma.
Right. That's one of the aspects of Life Camp that I find to be one of the most compelling, is the preventative nature of the work. You all aren't so much focusing on the reaction, which I know your work does call for that, but there's so much emphasis on the preventing the violence in the first place, combined with also helping to take care of your own community so you can not have this over policing by the actual police, which is something else I know that you all have. And then I'm careful in how I describe it, a co-production for public safety, where there is a, I'm not sure of the exact word, if it's just let's call it a co-production, not necessarily a cooperation, but there's a communication between Life Camp and the police, where something is popping off in your community. If Grandmother Jones hears some loud noises on the playground, before she might call the police, but the police are going to call you all, right? And say, what's going on in the playground here? And you're like, no, I got it. It's some 13-year-old kids with some firecrackers. We will handle it. Don't come in and over police our community. We have this as a community, which is something that as we look forward as a nation, how we can help decrease, which is something where we want the resources within our community. So I commend you for that. So I see, I'm not sure if Fat Joe has arrived yet, but
Fat Joe had to rush his mother to the hospital, to the doctor. He just texted he won't be able to make it. But I just want to say one thing on the police situation is that as we successfully come from the White House with our Peace Mobile, right? And doing a whole demonstration for Ambassador Rice and the head of criminal justice for the White House administration, we are able to show them how we can co-produce, right? We are able to show them that with the right resources, we can help alleviate NYPD or any police in any city having to respond to every single situation that they really don't need to respond to. And that those who are closest in the community with the right training and with the right resources can relieve the violence that is happening at a higher level, because we are closest to right there on that block. And so we've had many situations where our team went in and prevented even like the raid that killed Breonna Taylor, right? There's been many situations where we have been called to come and partner and help it be a safe entry into the house, and not so much where they tear the house up and you see, but it's a respectable relationship, or we do safe surrenders. And so, we understand that we have to create a holistic approach to this problem. And it requires us to level up our professionalism as credible messengers, as chief of streets, as a tactical. We have our own tactical unit. We have our own internal compliance. But a lot of what we're talking about is not in the full scope of the New York City crisis management system, which goes to why we continue to sit and have these conversations about further investing and believing that we can, if invested right, change the trajectory of violence in this nation.
Thank you, Erica. So should we, you tell me with run of show now, should we move to Kepra now or Pastor Mike? I have questions for you both. So if you just guide me on who we want to go to next, I will follow that lead, or I could just decide myself. Okay.
Let's go to Kepra.
Okay, let's, Capra. So I'm going to hand it off to you, but one of the questions that I did want to ask, particularly as it relates to New York City and to some extent across the country, but we've seen an uptick in gun violence that's touching all of our lives. How do you account for this uptick now? And what is Life Camp doing in this moment to combat the violence? You're on mute, Capra. Capra. Unmute. Capra's, all right, there you go.
Okay, this is what happens when you want to sit in your backyard and get some sun while we talk about something very heavy. It's important for us to keep it light in our bodies. We've actually been responding to a lot of situations, and we've been doing grief counseling over the past 72 hours, dealing with responses to gun violence. And so your question is valid. In order to answer the question, I have to give context. When the pandemic hit, most Black communities that were underserved were already in an extreme state of trauma. The pandemic, as most of us know, brought light to the disparities in our community. And it wasn't until then that people really saw that our communities were ravaged as food deserts, economic disparity, educational disparity, just so many layers across the board. And so imagine an already traumatized community being impacted by a global pandemic. When the pandemic hit, our community, for example, was the epicenter of the global epicenter of coronavirus. New York City was #1 with the highest rate of COVID. And then Southeast Queens, where we serve, had the highest rate of COVID-related deaths. Now you talk about people who might be 6 to 7 people in a 1 to 2 bedroom apartment, and they're used to parent being at work, children being at school, people being out to play. Now they're all in the same home. So there was that level of stress in even learning how to coexist in a small space. Then, because of the amount of deaths related to COVID in our community, a lot of people were losing their matriarchs and patriarchs. And remember, even in some of the housing developments, people had to wait for bodies to be removed. So imagine that someone that you love has passed on from COVID and you have to wait for that person to be released. All of those are layers of trauma, coupled with the fact that when you're in a food desert, meaning you're not in proximity to whole healthy food, and you have economic disparity and you're trying to ration food, you're eating a lot of starch and processed foods. That also has a health and a biological impact on the body. And so one of the things we talk about at Life Camp is, in addition to preventing and interrupting violence, we believe a healthy mind and body creates a peaceful community. So you take that cocktail of, and also the lack of social distancing. At the time that COVID hit, when the pandemic was high in our community, people who contracted COVID, unless they were dying and needed a respirator, were told to go home and socially distance themselves in their homes. Well, again, imagine you've got 5 to 7 people in a 1 to 2 bedroom apartment. There's very little social distancing. So you've got a lot of stress. You've got the stress of losing employment, the stress of losing loved ones and not being able to say goodbye, coupled with that cocktail of processed foods, of fast foods, of fried foods, and not a lot of fresh produce. And that in itself was almost like a slow simmer. So by the time people came outside, people were literally just releasing. And I'm not saying that to excuse the gun violence. I'm saying that if you already start traumatized and you're on that slow simmer and you don't have the tools, you don't have the resources, then that can impact the way people resolve conflict. So now you're outside and people are upset if you don't have a mask on, or, it's hot outside. There's so many things going on. In our community, what made us successful during the pandemic, we actually worked closely with the Queensborough president. We immediately found ways to find solutions for people to restore their immune systems, keep their immune system strong, restore peace in the home. We immediately started online programs called Wellness Wednesdays. We began to bring the Peacemobile into the community. We had Tonic Tuesdays. We were teaching people how to use simple tools that were in proximity, that were affordable, to create healthy tonics and also to resolve conflict. And by doing that, we actually received a proclamation for our work from the Queensborough president. And she stated that our efforts helped to flatten the curve in the community that at the time had the highest rate of COVID related deaths. So if we had the proper funding and Life Camp was scaled properly, we could continue this work. We had Mindfulness Mondays, Tonic Tuesdays, Wellness Wednesdays. And we did these things because we know people can remember that, just the alliteration and rhyme, but it really helped people to resolve the conflicts in the home. And then we also provided resources so that people could get access to remote learning, because a lot of our young people didn't have laptops and equipment. So that holistic response to gun violence is what we do, and we need more of it, to have more funding, to bring more Peacemobiles into communities that aren't going to necessarily raise a hand or know where to ask for help, and to be able to bring resources directly to people and tools to teach them how to resolve conflict, how to eat healthy, even with limited means, and how to restore balance in the home. We know for a fact helped to reduce gun violence. And we noticed that a lot of the incidents were outside of our catchment area, and we still responded.
Thank you, Kepra. You know, we know that the work of Life Camp works. We know that it works by the data. We know that it works anecdotally. We know that there are results for right here in New York City, what you all are doing. Pastor Mike, I'd like to turn it to you now, and thank you. Welcome. It is a real honor to be in dialogue with you on this topic as well. I have tremendous respect, as does my husband, for the work that you have been doing. So thank you. And thank you for being here to amplify the work of Life Camp. So given what has been discussed so far, how does this look on a scaled out, on a national scale? And if you could, give us some context around it from what you see in the work that you do, how does Life Camp's work look scaled out nationally?
Well, it's great to be with everyone, and certainly to my comrades and friends, Erica and Kepra. I stand here certainly in deep, not just solidarity, but endorsement of the work that they've not only been able to achieve in New York, but they've been a catalyst, a leader all across this country. Gun violence in Black and Brown communities in particular has been likely the most singular crisis that has often been left to Black and Brown people to solve on our own. Most folks do not believe that the issues of the harm and the trauma and the pain that so many of our family members have had to endure requires a national or federal response. And so folks like Erica and Kepra and others across the country, we've had to literally from scratch build strategies that were created often away from the visible eye of media, of press, of elected officials. And through the genius of these wonderful sisters, they've been able to pull together some amazing consequential work that has served as a powerful framework, a paradigmatic emblem of what we've been able to do all across the country. And so I just want to reiterate that gun violence in our communities is a solvable issue. It is not intractable. It requires significant investment. It requires significant technical assistance. It requires Black and Brown experts like Erica and Kepra and others to be at the head of the table and helping to architect this all across the country. And that's what Life Camp has been. It's been one of the most important comprehensive models of Black and Brown folks who are serious about loving people, healing people into peace. And I do believe that what the world needs now is not more violence in an effort to secure peace. We need more peacemakers. We need more healers. And we need those folks to be resourced by our tax dollars and certainly by the philanthropic generosity of those who are able to invest in what we know works. Life Camp was a very important partner and catalyst in us bringing together, I would say we're up to hundreds now of organizations and groups across the country who do a small slice of what Life Camp does in their own communities. We call it, and Erica has on the t-shirt, Fund Peace. And we thought it would be important to say we need to fund peace, because it is the funding of peacemaking work that we think actually will result in the reduction of violence. We have found that when we can pull folks together and always give people a concrete example of what their work can look like. For instance, the Peace Mobile that Erica and them have. We all want a Peace Mobile in every city across the country. Somebody say, man, I want one. Ours will probably be blue and gold, not orange and blue, because we at Oakland. Somebody say, man, so we ain't. Erica brought Steve Kerr onto the Peace Mobile when the Warriors played the Knicks last year. He called me. He was like, we want one of those in Oakland, but it can't be orange and blue. So, but the idea is that imagine being able to have a Peace Mobile driving throughout the city in an effort to prevent conflicts, in an effort to provide mindfulness and high blood pressure tests and therapy appointments. And I mean, you're actually putting peace on the streets, right, in a very structured and intentional way. Being able to have a brick and mortar space that is all committed to the healing and the transformation of our communities. People know that this is a safe space where they can run. I was in a conversation with a public health official, and they told me that the largest provider for mental health services in this country are jails and prisons for Black men. That there is no system or network of mental health drop-in centers for Black men. And so Life Camp is one example of a mental health drop-in center where individuals can drop in anytime and get mental health support. And so we believe that Life Camp is a national leader. It is a national model. It is an important convener of many of us all across the country. And that convening work has allowed us to really influence the White House. Eric has already mentioned Ambassador Susan Rice, but I would just say at the beginning of this year, there were $0 that were committed from the Biden administration to fund peace, to scale up the work that Erica and myself and so many of us are leading across the country. And over the last 90 to 100 days, we've been able to get the White House to literally put $5 billion in their infrastructure bill, to make available $350 billion of the national ARP money for community violence initiatives, and to make available up to $10 billion in the federal budget in the federal grant programs in the 5 agencies for local municipalities to apply. Again, this is because people like Erica Ford and Kemper and so many of us were able to point to a very concrete way of responding to gun violence and led that conversation into the highest reaches and spaces of the White House. We know that less than 1% of a city's population can be responsible for as much as 60% of the violence. That less than 1%, costs us per either shooting or homicide as much as $1 to $2 million per incident. It is so much cheaper to invest about $40,000 per person into case management, healing, victim services, et cetera. And that is the work of Life Camp. We hope and we need folks to really, really invest. I was excited to see Mackenzie Scott invest so much of her wealth into some very worthy organizations. I hope one day Mackenzie Scott will look at Life Camp and our Fund Peace work and put tens of millions of dollars into groups like ours that are able to literally across the country in places like New York, et cetera, put those resources to help us fund peace. We need this investment, particularly as we are moving into a very difficult summer. And we hope that you all will take very seriously the jewel that is in New York, the leadership that is Erica Ford, and help us fund peace, help us keep this work thriving. It literally saves lives without destroying our communities through brutal policing and over incarceration. And so I'm with them. I rock with them. As long as they're willing to rock with the bootleg preacher, I'm willing to rock with the angry peacemaker, and together we'll change the world.
Thank you, Pastor Mike. You brought up, and for the pragmatic folks on the call, you brought up the point. You said it also just makes economic sense.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So can
Absolutely.
you elaborate just a little bit on that, because folks are looking at the bottom line too. So speak on it from that perspective as well, if you don't mind.
So you can actually go to a website called thecostofviolence.org, and a comrade and partner of ours, the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, we started to create these cost of violence reports that actually lay out the amount of dollars that we spend on the back end of paying for gun violence. And when you look at the cost of injuries per shooting, you'll find that one suspect and one victim that is engaged in a gun-related shooting or homicide can cost a city $2.6 million. And the numbers that go into that would be the police response, the fire department, the scene cleanup, ambulance, a trauma center, a surgery and rehabilitation. And then you go into the state costs around police investigation, pre-trial, DA and public defenders, post-trial incarceration, and then prison. And then you talk about the hospital costs and the coroner's office and the victims of crime for funeral services, lost tax revenue, victim relocation, on and on and on. These costs add up, right? And those are just the costs related to the lifestyle, right? Or the engagement of this human being in a social context. We know that the cost of a life is, you can't quantify it, right? The gaping hole that is left in the heart of a mother or a father or a son or a daughter, you can't quantify that. And so part of what we're saying, with our local police departments are accounting for sometimes 40 to 60% of the general fund of our cities. And we're still not seeing reduction in gun violence for decades. And yet we have groups like Life Camp or the New York Crisis Management Center are able, with a fraction of those costs, to go 500 or so days without a shooting, right? We're talking, I think, $4 billion or so in the New York Police Department budget. And then Erica and their program is less than $40 million. I mean, that economic investment model is not only unsustainable for the city, but it certainly does not cause us to be able to stabilize communities. And so when we talk about the cost of violence, we're saying it is indeed, oh, thank you, Erica, $9 billion. I was trying not to be the lying black preacher on the call and throw out a frivolous number, but it's more, it's $9 billion. And so just imagine what could be done with just a fraction of those resources. And so it's really important for us to appreciate that the resources that will be invested are not just kind of like you throw the dollars up into the air and they just fall willy-nilly into the community. No, these will be targeted interventions. Imagine being able to literally hire thousands of individuals who are trained in public health, who are trained in de-escalation, who are trained in mental health supports, because the trauma, the anger, the fear, and the pain, that has to be meted out of people. It has to be triaged out of people. It has to be counseled and loved and hugged and loved out of people. Imagine having these peacemaker armies all throughout the neighborhood. Imagine being able to make sure that they and their families are stabilized, that they have a pathway to opportunity, a pathway to health. All of this is what the resource would enable folks to do. And we do believe that this is within our grasp. We know the models work. At this point, it's just about scaling them up.
Thank you for putting it into the economic perspective as well, as we think about how resources are utilized. And we know that one of the biggest issues for our communities is the way resources are allocated, period, right? When you look at an
Yeah.
overall budget of a city like New York and places where there's just a lot of fat and a lot of waste and a lot of bureaucracy across several different sectors, police departments included. But and this could be a question for, any of, Capra, Erica, Pastor Mike, for you to answer. In terms of consistency, this is a conversation that Erica and I have had. How important is it for a program and the methodology of Life Camp for, as we scale it out? Let's just talk citywide for a moment, because New York City, a city of 8+ million people. How important is it for there to be more uniformity and more consistency? And I am biased, but I say this, I'd like to say that I am objectively subjective about the work that Life Camp does. And I do believe that they have proof of concept. And that's, you see that because their crisis management system has been replicated across the city. But for this to scale in a way that is actually effective, how important is it for there to be a consistency throughout the city, throughout the nation, as we have programs such as Life Camp, which is one of a kind, but for it to continue to grow in an effective way?
I think it's of extreme importance. And one of the things that we did when we took the model to the city is we did it under the FEMA model, which is response, recovery, mitigation, and prevention. And when you look at those buckets, all work, every organization, every model fits into those buckets. And so when you go into a community, when you go into a city, they might not need the full scale, they might just need a lot of prevention or a lot of response because there's been a lot of shootings in the Bronx and they need to recover, right? Just like we're in the recovery stage of the coronavirus. When we were in we never got to be in the prevention. We're in the prevention because we wore the mask, right? To help prevent the spread. But we have to, right now there's 36 sites. There's 5 Peace Mobiles across the city. But each Peace Mobile, although we came up with the concept, Life Camp, we started this concept 10, 12 years ago. We got an RV and we use it as an example, and that's where it came from, right? If they would have said, Life Camp, take the Peace Mobiles, fit them out, train people how to use the Peace Mobile, and then we distribute the Peace Mobiles and we oversight and train each organization on a consistent basis and holding us accountable to some data that allows us to show up the same. Just like when NYPD shows up, there's an emergency response vehicle, there's a tactical vehicle, there's the car. Each vehicle is defined and used in a specific way. And so it brings a certain sense of, to the city, there's order and structure. And if they see Group A in Brooklyn and Group A in City and then Group A in D in Staten Island and this one over here, there's no sense that there is an organization that can resolve the problem. They just think it's a bunch of people doing what, right? And so they hear words and stuff, but they need to see a system where our body works as a system. We can't take the arm off and give it to Mike in Oakland on Tuesday, and then he has your eyes on Thursday. And no, it's one body, right? And so we have to work as one body towards the resolution of the situation. And coming from the FEMA model allows all the models, all the groups to work together as one and address the problem face on from its perspective. So it's of extreme importance, in a duplication.
No, thank you. Thank you, Erica. Would you all mind if we did questions? Take questions? Oh, wait, Capra, I think was saying something, and then,
So I just wanted to add to what Erica was saying. From our experience, it takes about 2 years to allow someone the process of healing. So you look at Jeffrey Canada's model with the Harlem Children's Zone, how they took children from childhood through the college years. When we're dealing with the FEMA model, like Erica said, in terms of preparedness, mitigation, response, recovery, in the moment when gun violence is hot, we're in response and recovery, right? But what happens is that if there's a large volume of shootings at one time, there's only so much recovery we can offer to a person because we're constantly in response as one team. And so the need for resources to scale is that you can keep that person through the healing process so that they can come to a place where they become an ambassador in the community. Our goal is to take people who were in closest proximity to the pain and the trauma and help them to transform that so they can then be healers in the community. We've done that successfully with several of our parents who've unfortunately lost their children to gun violence. Erica took them into Life Camp. We provided resources, then we gave them employment, and then we supported them in starting their own nonprofits. And now they are helping other people. So that cultural relevance is important, and it helps to restore community. So we don't want to just be putting out fires. We need at least 2 years, with each participant we found to really help them to not only heal, but then become truly productive, self-sustaining members of society. And that requires consistent support and resources.
that's right. No, thank you. Thank you, Capra. So we'd like to take some questions. If anyone has any questions, please just unmute yourself or put your hand up. Any questions? Yes, April.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this. It's not really a question as much as an emphasis. Like, we've heard Erica talk a lot this morning about, like, in our containment area or in our catchment area, we've kept shootings down, and the city provides money for an area. And like a block away from the area that the city is providing funding for, if there's a shooting on the next block over, and Erica goes, like, it's philanthropy funding that work, not the city. And the city's got a reason for its catchment areas. We don't have to go into that, but it just strikes me as such an example of how important support beyond the government support is, because first of all, there's, it's limited in geographic targets, and it's limited in what you can do with that money. And so to really, I've seen in the work of Life Camp, which is fantastic, like a real need to have some funding streams that are much more allow the organization to be much more responsive in their reactions than sometimes government funds allow. So I just want to emphasize how important philanthropic funding is to complement the government funding. And I also want to say, as a person who's talked to a bunch of folks who've gotten these vans, like, I'm with Erica. If the city had had a model for that, instead of letting each one just do their own thing, I keep telling everyone, go to Life Camp, check out Life Camp's trauma unit, because they have it down, and other people, it took some work to get it down, and we could be capitalizing more on that work that's already been done.
So
okay, go ahead.
Hi, it's Leah. How are you? I have a quick question. So how would that look like being said? I live up in New Rochelle, and how would you approach the community to be able to do something like that? What are the steps that you would take to reach out?
So, for example, New Rochelle's, the mayor of Yonkers called me last week to come up and train and begin to have that discussion about how we bring the model over there. And so it is first the conversation. That's a city government, right? And so it would be that city government paying for the work to be done in their city, identifying those credible messengers in that city and working to scale the work over there. On another level, to April's point, there's some work in Yonkers that is funded by the state. So you always hear the mayor, for those who are in the city, talk about cure violence, cure violence, cure violence, cure violence, right? Cure violence is a piece of the New York City crisis management system. And let's say cure violence is $500,000. A full system in its full capacity is close to $5 million. So cure violence is 500,000 of that $5 million full system. And so most people only get the 500,000. And so to April's point, if we didn't have April's support for a group of young men who were on both sides of a very serious situation where we had to physically move people out, we had to pay them to participate during COVID for, they weren't computer people, let's put it that way. And it was an intense type of situation, and we had to pay them to be on there because they wouldn't have did it any other way. And so her work, her investment in our expansion, that was way on the other side of where we work, was able to literally save some young men's life. And that young man who we invested in went from a participant to a violence interrupter to a violence interrupter supervisor. Another funder paid his rent for a whole year to help make him stable and get him out of this neighborhood. So the partnership with a group of people allowed us to shift a whole gang. And this gang, by the police's definition, was responsible for 26 people being killed at one point in time in this community. And so it is very important for us to go beyond the borders of what they put us in terms of catchment areas. And that is something which Keppra was talking about. We often go beyond borders. And so having more peace mobiles, which we can put another peace mobile on the floor for $350,000 investment for a year, will allow you to be in other places and set up in other areas that are not near your catchment area, where some people can't come to the other side of town. And so those are the things.
Are there any other questions? Let me ask them, as you think about these different areas and different communities, whether in New York City, beyond the boundaries of New York City and just across the country, I imagine from community to community that could use the services of Life Camp, that there are, obviously different dynamics. How do you make the adjustments as you conceptualize expanding out? Or are there just best practices that work for communities that are uniform? And when it's not uniform, what's sort of the streamlined tactic that you use to work in so many different communities across the country?
I'll answer part of this. The main thing is those credible messengers, right? Is those individuals who are formerly incarcerated, who are in our community, and this is the Peace Mobile, to give you a visual sense. If we were to take a Peace Mobile to a community, we would immediately connect with a group of people in that community so that they know who to bring on the Peace Mobile. They know the families impacted. They know the people who have the highest potential to be shot or shoot someone. And so first identifying those hot spots to take the Peace Mobile and those hot individuals to bring on the Peace Mobile. Then Keppra and her team will provide the services needed to help them transform and heal, while our intervention specialists and outreach workers will work directly hands-on with those individuals and their families to change behavioral norms, to change the interaction and the way they see the world and the way they respond to trauma and violence. And then helping them be productive citizens, where could be starting their own business. It could be getting a job in HVAC or OSHA training, or paying them to be in a leadership program, and paying them to go through different kind of rites of passages or community conversations. And that's the young man to the right with the orange shirt kind of looking over, is the young man that April invested in him, helped us invest in him and his team. This is us using the Peace Mobile with the radio station to go around and do live radio shows and give out different things during holiday times and so on and so forth. And so we use the Peace Mobile as experiences, engagements, and opportunities for communities to transform and heal.
Kepra, were you adding something to that as well?
I thought I
You
was
could-
unmuted. So there are,
Yeah.
yes, just to
Leave
add
it
to what
on.
Erica was saying, to answer your question, there are fundamental internal and external supports that are needed, right? We call them wraparound services. So in some cases, on an external, people may need legal support, they may need workforce development, they may need nutritional support, you know, economic empowerment and certain trainings. That's external. Then the internal deals with what's actually happening, not only inside the mind and heart of the young person, but of their family and also inside the home. So then based on what we assess, we determine what's called a risk assessment and a needs assessment. And then we determine what we're going to provide. And like she said, our cultural IQ allows us to deliver it in a way that it will be received. A lot of people aren't receptive to therapeutic services or the term. And so we don't even call it that. We just know how to go in and give what people need. And then just from a biological standpoint, you know, studies say that 75% of African Americans have experienced a lifetime of trauma. From each major incident, there's not been any reprieve after slavery, after the Jim Crow era, after the civil rights era, after the, you know, the COVID era, the George Floyd era. There's not really been a moment, even after COVID. It's like, okay, everything is open now, let's return back to normal. But what was normal for people who were already pre-traumatized? And so we know how to deal with the layers that are happening in each family, relating to the young person and even a significant other, because a lot of these young men are fathers. And so there are so many dynamics. I think what makes Life Camp unique and what makes us successful is that we don't just follow the typical model of violence intervention. We also go in and look at how can we restore wholeness or help this family restore wholeness within the household unit so that they can then extend that into the community.
Well,
Thank you.
that were you adding something, Erica? I'm sorry. Pastor
No, I
Mike?
was just saying thank you.
Yeah.
Because to Leah's point, that's how you go into a community, right? Because there's social workers, there's people who do the stuff. We just got to bring us all together to work as
Right,
one
to create a
system.
system.
And that's
Yes.
what it is.
Well, indeed, I think that New York City, the nation would benefit. We'd have a more peaceful nation. You know, I call Erica well, she calls herself the peace czar. To me, she's the commissioner of peace. I like a even more formal title for her to expand the work across the nation. So this is that point in the Zoom where, first of all, thank you all so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and to hear this presentation. And I just, as we close things up, it's always about next steps. That's how we, you know, that's how they stay afloat. What can everyone here do to help? Are there any, you know, sort of marching requests for the people assembled here on this call, Erica or Kepra or Pastor Mike?
Well, I'll just simply, you know, invite you all to support in 3 ways. Donate, obviously, is a very important way for you to continue to make sure that Life Camp is never operating from a scarcity reality, but operating out of abundance in the hearts and the bodies and the minds that are literally being poured out regularly. I think it would be great to allow them to not have to continue to, you know, rob Peter to pay Paul, as you used to say. So donate. Second way I often ask folks to do is to advocate. In every city, I saw Leah mention the Yonkers area. We need champions of this work. We need champions of this work beyond Black and brown folks. We need champions of this work when we're not in the room. Many of you have much more political cachet and relationships, and so for you to bring up Life Camp in a donor meeting, with an elected official, with a consultant, and ensure that you're advocating, you're being a champion, an honorary Life Camp champion, advocating for them, I think would be amazing. And then participate. Is our DAP, put some DAP on it. Donate, advocate, and participate. You should show up to a Life Camp event and volunteer for an hour or so, and just participate in the life of Life Camp, right? And you will find yourself totally transformed. Here in Oakland, we had lots and lots of folks participating in our night walks or in our healing sessions, and they became some of the biggest champions because they actually met some of the young people and some of the families that heard the success stories. Their hearts were torn to pieces of some of the tragedies that have happened. So I'll just say that to you all: donate, advocate, participate. I think it would go a long way.
Donate, advocate, participate, and be a disciple. Go out and spread the word. Spread the word. Tell all your friends, your organizations. I know my friends are probably sick of me talking about it, but I'm like, that's okay. Let's just keep on spreading the word. And every time I have one of these conversations, I actually learn something new. And I'll just say this: we can talk about it offline, but Erica, did you say that there's someone on this call who had underwritten the rent for someone's housing rent?
The person that did the rent is not on this call.
Okay.
Someone did, and what I was saying is April helped us do an emergency move and
Okay.
intense
An immediate
online
safety
leadership.
transfer. Yes.
Okay.
Immediate safety transfer and thing. But there is somebody who did a moval, and we do have those situations. They don't
let's
fund
talk
those
about
type
that
of
more.
things.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Like, people look oftentimes, as you know, for specific ways to get engaged and get help, be helpful. And I think that that's really interesting, because I'm hearing them like, oh, is that something? I mean, I've donated in different ways, but housing, one of the most basic rights, to be able to say, can I sponsor someone to pay their rent for a year? I mean, I think that is a real tangible way to contribute as well. So let's, as we think about ways, as we ask people to participate, that's certainly something that I'd be interested in doing. And that's a specific request where people can feel like my contribution is immediately being impactful.
Yeah. We
Yeah,
just
that
had
had
to
an
do an
immediate-
emergency. We just had to do an emergency Airbnb for a month for someone who had a very serious and critical situation yesterday.
Yes,
You know.
yes. And those things aren't part of a grant. They're not a line item, but we know that they're immediate. And in that moment, we have to sometimes take people out of the environment. There's only so much trauma-informed work you can do when somebody's sitting in hot lava. You're not going to
Yeah.
meditate when your feet are on
Right.
fire. So, and even for parents, what we found with mothers and fathers who lose their children, even giving them a place to go for the weekend before they come right back to the place where their child was killed. We've had parents who've had to walk past the very space where their child might have been killed to go into their apartment, and it's re-traumatizing all over again. So we can't emphasize enough, especially with the way that gentrification and rents are happening, that just being able to sponsor someone either to move out of an environment, I mean, that was immediately life-changing for both of those young men. You saw an immediate shift. because they were able to actually sleep at night without hearing the
Right.
sirens or worrying that if they went outside, they would be faced with some other confrontation. And for the parents who we've been able, and you know, Crystal, because you've connected us with some folks that we were able to take to the Hamptons, mothers
Right.
who lost their children to gun violence, and we were able to take them to the Hamptons for a week, and their children were able to go to Camp Good Grief, as a matter of fact, and the mothers were able to just have a moment to connect, to share their unfortunate stories, but also to heal. And those things we take
Yes.
for granted when we have spaces, you know, like this beautiful backyard that I'm in. I could disappear from everything for a moment, but everyone doesn't have that.
Right.
And so that really does mean something. I would also like to offer that one of the things that Life Camp desperately needs is a space. We have been
Right.
operating out of a storefront for years. It is amazing to me how much we actually do in that space. Most people think when they come to our space that we've had a state-of-the-art center based on all of the stuff that we've done. And I'm sure yourself as well, Crystal, they go, oh my gosh, it's a storefront. And so the one thing that we desperately need is a state-of-the-art, a huge center with a kitchen, with
Yes.
offices, with
Yeah, you
rooms where
all need
young
your
people
own
can
community
congregate.
center. You've been
Yes,
Yes,
talking
we
about this
do.
community center, so as we speak it
yes,
into existence, that is something that will just expand on the services that you all are already offering. And I'd like to see you all with the community center, a life camp, real
Yes.
community center where we can get our young kids, our youth off of the streets, in a way where they can then be exposed to the programs that Life Camp has, the employment opportunities that Life Camp has, the trauma, the trauma counseling, you know,
Yes.
you have what you like, basically like an expanded version in many respects of the Peacemobile, because you all have maxed out every millimeter of space
every space. Yes,
in that
yes,
Peacemobile. I mean, bless you all for doing that, but let's scale out the storefront and own the block. How about that? Let's
yes. Imagine
Yes.
how
figure out
much
how we're
more
gonna
we
make that
could
happen.
do.
Yes.
Imagine how much more we could do with a
Yep.
place we could anchor in and kids could call home.
That's right.
You
That's
know?
right. So,
Yeah.
so I'm sensitive to people's time because I know it's only supposed to be an
Yes.
hour and we're 7 minutes over, and I want to be sensitive on that. But thank you all. Thank you all for asking me to lead a conversation. I am honored as always, and I'm looking forward to doing many, many more and continuing to amplify.
Thank you
you
so
for
much,
doing it
Crystal
for
and
us.
Pastor Mike.
Everyone have a blessed day.
Yes.
I'll talk
Yes.
to you
And
all.
I put the link. You can get more information on the Peacemobile. Another Peacemobile can hit the streets for a minimal $350,000. You know, but we look forward to talking to you and building on all the ideas from today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
See you later, April.